Okay, welcome to our first video. Today our video is going to be on equivalent fractions and simplifying fractions. So in your interactive notebook, you need to make sure you write down the title, Equivalent Fractions and Simplifying Fractions, in the top part of your interactive notebook. You also need to write down the learning targets, which are right here. You need to write down the learning targets every day. Today we have two learning targets. The first learning target is students will be able to write an equivalent fraction, and the second learning target is students will be able to simplify a fraction. So you need to write those down in your interactive notebook. This is an advantage of video. I'm going to move on, but if you need to pause this, go ahead and pause it and finish writing down the information and then continue on. So I'm moving on to the next slide. In our next slide, we're going to be working with example 1. Okay, what you need to write down on this slide is you need to write down example 1, and then you need to write down the directions, write two equivalent fractions, and then you need to write A and B plus all the work that I do for solving A and B. You do not need to write that part. That part you don't need to write. You already have the title. Okay? In example 1, we are going to write two equivalent fractions. So in A, I've given you the fraction 2/3. To write an equivalent fraction, that means you are going to write a fraction that represents the same value but uses different numbers. So 2/3 is not equivalent to 2/3. That is the same thing. So I need to think about, okay, if I have 2/3, what else could that be? So if I do a quick little model for 2/3, and I break this up and I shade in two, there's 2/3. How can I make that equivalent? Well, if I were to add another third, so if I were to cut each of these in half, I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spots, and 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are shaded. Because I cut them in half, what I basically did is I multiplied the numerator and the denominator by the same value. So in order to find equivalent fractions, you must multiply the numerator, which is the top number, and the denominator, which is the bottom number, by the same number. So I'm going to choose 2. I multiply them both by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 2 is 6. That is one equivalent fraction. Let's do another one. Okay, I just have to pick a different number to multiply the numerator and denominator by. Let's try 5. So I do 2 times 5, and I do 3 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times 5 is 15. There is two equivalent fractions. They all represent the same amount. Okay, just how big are the slices of the pie is all that comes down to. Okay, in example B, we have 10/15. So for this one, again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to choose a number and I'm going to multiply the numerator and denominator by that number. I'm going to try 3. I'm going to multiply both by 3. 10 times 3 is 30. 15 times 3 is 45. So there's one equivalent fraction. Okay, let's do a second one. Now when I do equivalent fractions, I can also divide the numerator and denominator by the same number. So in this case, I can see that 5 goes into both 10 and 15. So I can divide them both by the same number. And that's going to give me 2/3. So those are equivalent. Okay, so when you are finding equivalent fractions, you can either multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number, or you can divide the numerator and denominator by the same number. Okay, you need to make sure you write down everything below this line. If you need to pause, go ahead. I am moving on to the next screen. In example 2, we have the same situation here where we have equivalent fractions, except you have to figure out what part is missing in the equivalent fraction. In order to find these answers, what you need to do is first figure out what the part is. You know, in this first example A, I know that the denominators in the first fraction is 5 and the second fraction is 20. So how do I go from 5 to 20? I'm always thinking in multiplication or division. So that is times 4. Multiply by 4. Whatever I do to the bottom, I need to do the top because it has to be the same. I have to multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. So that means I'm going to multiply the numerator by 4 also. 3 times 4 is 12, so my answer is x equals 12. And that's my final answer. For example B, I have 8 over 12 equals 4 over x. The part that I already know is the 8 and the 4 of the numerator. So how do I go from 8 to 4? Well, to go from 8 to 4, you're dividing by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I have to do the same thing in the denominator because they have to be consistent. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So my final answer is x equals 6. And that is how you do those. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. If you need to pause, go ahead. In example 3, we are going to simplify. Simplify means that you're going to divide until no number goes in the numerator and denominator except for 1. So in example A here, I have 6 and 10. I have to think, what number goes into both 6 and 10? Okay, 3 goes into 6, but 3 does not go into 10, so that would not work. But 2 goes into both of them, so I'm going to divide them both by 2. When I divide them both by 2, I get 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2 is 5. I get 3/5. Nothing else goes into 3 and 5. 1 besides 1. 2 doesn't go into them. 3 goes into 3. 4 doesn't go into 3. Okay? So that's my final answer. For B, I have to figure out what number goes into 14 and 21. 2 goes into 14, but 2 does not go into 21. 3 goes into 21, but does not go into 14. 4 does not go into them. 5 does not go into them. 6 does not. 7. 7 goes into both of them. Divide them both by 7. 14 divided by 7 is 2. 21 divided by 7 is 3. And you get 2/3 as your final answer. And that is how you simplify fractions. Sometimes it takes multiple steps when you're simplifying, so always check to see if there's anything else that goes in your answer before you move on. That is the end of our video. If you need to pause or rewind at any point, go ahead. Have a great night, and I will see you guys in class tomorrow.